Before we get into this next video, I'm making connections between the graph of f and the graph of f prime. Different colors might be really helpful here. If you want to pause the video and go find some colored pencils or pens or something like that, it might make this stuff a lot easier. So take a moment, pause this video, go find those, and I'll be here waiting. Okay. On that worksheet we were looking at before, section 2.1, in-class practice with graphical derivatives and differentiability. I'd like to take a look at the bottom of the first page, where it says match the graph of each function with the graph of its derivative over here. These are all graphs of f of x. These are graphs of f prime of x, because you know when we create our formula for f prime of x, it's a function in and of itself. And I want to somehow be able to match up the graph of the original function with the graph of the function of the derivative. Well, you know, before we do this, let's take a couple notes on ideas here. So let's call this next section graphical interpretations of f prime of x, or the graphical interpretation of f prime of x. How can we understand the graph of f of x? First of all, f prime of x is a graph whose values, y values, represent the slopes of the original function f of x at various x values. F prime of x. Let me try that again. The y values on f prime of x represent the slope of f of x at each x value. I'm not expecting that to have made perfect sense. Just copy it down for right now. The y values on f prime of x are going to represent the slope of our original function f of x at each x value. The y values on f prime of x represent the slope of f of x at each x value. So for example, over here, if I found the slope and was able to figure out that the slope over here was 5, the derivative would have a y value at that same x value, a y value that would happen to be 5. Because the y values over here are going to represent the slopes over here. I got to tell you more. To interpret, where f of x has a positive slope, f prime of x has positive y values. And similarly, where f of x has a negative slope, f prime of x has negative y values. Where f of x has a positive slope, f prime of x has positive y values. Where f of x has a negative slope, f prime of x has negative y values. And somehow this is all we're going to need to match things. Take a moment and pause the video if you need more time to copy that down. And then I'd like to go back to that worksheet. These are original functions f of x. These are graphs of f prime of x. The slopes of these functions will correspond to y values on these functions. What I'm going to do is take out my two colors. I am going to, in blue, trace out my positive slopes, and in pink, I'm going to trace out my negative slopes. So what I mean by that is, let's see, looks like I have a negative slope over there, so I'm going to trace this one out in pink. I then have a positive slope over here, so I'm going to trace that out in blue. And a negative slope over there, so I'm going to trace that out in pink. And I want you to take a moment and do that with B, C, and D. Trace out the positive slopes in the same color you chose in A, and negative slopes in the same color you chose as A. Negative slope here, positive slope over there, positive, negative, positive, negative. I just traced out my slopes. What I'm now going to do on these graphs over here is, using the same colors, I'm going to trace out my y values and distinguish between positive y values and negative y values. What I mean is, I used blue for my positive slopes over here. I'm going to use blue for my positive y values. And I'm going to use pink to trace out negative y values. So in number 1, I have negative y values over there because I'm below the x-axis. Then I'm going to switch over to positive y values, and it's going to look something like that. Take a moment and do that same tracing in 2, 3, and 4. Positive y values. Whoa, totally wrong. Ignore that. Sorry. Positive y values like that. I don't have my whiteout pen with me. But negative y values, that's clearly pink now. Negative y values. Positive y values. Negative y values. Positive y values. Negative y values. Then positive y values, negative y values, and I've got things traced out. My goal now is to match the slopes of these 4 with the y values of these 4. In letter A, I start with a negative slope, followed by a positive slope, followed by a negative slope. And I'm looking for a graph over here that starts with negative y values, then positive y values, then negative y values. What graph is that? I would say it's 2, because I have negative y values, positive y values, negative y values. I feel like if you have the colors in there, it makes this so much easier. And you are absolutely going to be welcome to use colors on your quiz, on your test. On the AP exam, they don't allow like colored pencils, but you can bring like, I think a pen and something else. So we can still make it work on the AP exam. Number 2, a positive slope, a negative slope, a positive slope. Not number 2, letter B, sorry. Letter B, a positive slope, a negative slope, a positive slope. What's that going to match up with? I think that's going to match up with 4. Positive values, negative values, positive values. And actually, let's talk a little more about this. Why is 4 discontinuous? What's going on here that came from our graph in B? Sharp turn over here, which means the derivative doesn't exist. I don't actually have a derivative right there. Same over here, derivative doesn't exist because the sharp turn don't have a derivative there, but I can say more. This is some sort of positive constant slope, so this needs to be a positive constant y value. This is a negative constant slope, so I have a negative constant y value. Positive constant slope, positive constant y value. Everything's checking. Go do letter C. Letter C gets matched up with what? Negative slope, positive slope. I see negative y values, positive y values. I'll match that with 1. I can even say a little more. Over here, my slope's pretty close to 0, and here my slope's close to 0. Over here, yeah, my y values are getting pretty close to 0. My y values there are getting close to 0. Clearly, D then has to be 3, but everything checks. Positive slope, positive y values. Negative slope, negative y values. Positive slope, positive y values, and so on. Everything's checking with that. I want you to try some of these on your own. On the back of the sheet, I'd like to look at 21 through 26 on the side. I would like you to, so these are the original functions. These are the derivatives. On the original function, you're going to trace out the slopes. On the derivatives, you're going to trace out the values, the y values, and you're going to try to match them. Take a few moments, go do that, and then Edpuzzle's going to ask you for the answers to those 6 questions. See what you can do. So by all sorts of fun video magic, they're suddenly colored. I use the same color scheme as the other side. Blue is positive. Pink is negative, so here I traced out my positive slopes in blue, negative slopes in pink. Over here, positive y values in blue, negative y values in pink. And now we're going to match. 21, negative slope, negative y values, positive y values. 21 is C. 22, positive slope, positive slope. Positive y values, negative y values, positive y values. We'll match 22 with E. Negative slope, positive slope, negative slope, positive slope. Negative y values, positive. Oh, wait a minute. 23 could be A or B. Let me hold off on that. 24, negative slope everywhere, negative y values everywhere. Slope is close to 0, slope is close to 0. Y values are close to 0. Slope's undefined. Y values are, well, undefined, doesn't exist over there. 24 is going to be D. 25 is the same pattern as 23. So I'm going to hold off on that. Negative slope, negative slope. That's going to get matched with, looks like F, negative y values, positive y values, negative y values. As for these two, I feel like over here, this slope is much steeper, a much more negative slope than what I have going on over here. So I want a more negative value on my derivative. I think this is a more negative value than this, so I'm going to go with 23 as A, and 25 as B. We are going to keep looking at graphical connections like this throughout a lot of the year. This is actually a fairly common topic on the AP exam. And for right now, as far as we're concerned, use colors for things. I personally feel like they help a lot.